Last Wednesday, a severely intellectually disabled man, Shane Chamberlain, who's 51, his 76-year-old mother, Diane Moody, and a lawyer working pro bono because he believed their case was so legally and morally strong, had what may be a landmark victory over the Ministry of Health in the Court of Appeal. Diane cares for Shane, who was incapable of looking after himself, in return for which the ministry decided to pay her for just 17 hours a week at the minimum wage. The appeal court rejected that decision, and it went further, noting it was the third occasion on which a dispute between the ministry and parents who care for disabled adult children had reached them, using words like unease and impenetrable, and saying, and I quote, "The minister has erred in law." What next? The ministry wouldn't talk to us, saying they're still assessing the Court of Appeal's decision. Our invitation for the ministry to join us remains open for as long as it takes for them to front. Nor will the new minister front on this yet, but the appeal court wasn't referring to him. But all of this follows a history of legal action by parents, first against not being paid at all, then against funded family care introduced by the last government, with loud claims it would lead to them being paid. Yesterday, cameraman Nick Monroe and I went to meet the Court of Appeal victors to discuss their case and the larger issue here. Shane and his mum Diane, who, had she listened to the people in charge 5 decades ago, would never have cared for her son at all.
When Shane was born, we were told then, because he was just so ill, look, just put him away somewhere and forget that you've had him. And of course it wasn't an option for us to do that. But that was always the...
Did you discuss it? Did you think, can we do this?
No, it wouldn't have even entered my mind.
51 years after Diane and her late husband didn't even consider giving Shane up, he sat beside me yesterday as his mum told me all about him. Shane sat very politely, paying no attention at all, and then he simply got up and walked off, like a child. When the assessment's happening?
It's an aeroplane, he's just going.
Oh yes, the helicopter's going round and round, that helicopter.
Yeah.
So when the assessment's happening, so Shane's he's just going off to see the helicopter?
Yeah, he'll just go and see the fingers go in the ears because he's got highly sensitive hearing. So where that helicopter sounds just like that to us, it probably sounds 3 times as loud to Shane. Yeah. So that's where the fingers go in the ears. Or if somebody argues, if we suddenly got into an argument, he'd put his fingers in his ears and just shoot straight to his bedroom and close the door. So if you don't mind, we won't argue.
Okay. It's good to establish the ground rules early on.
Yeah, just keep it calm.
Okay, well, I'll try my best.
Yeah.
You know, when he got up before and he was wandering across, you just looked at him.
He's just sort of a nice, you're just sort of nice, aren't you? Your marbles? Yeah, nobody pinch your marbles.
No one will take, if anyone takes your marbles, that's trouble.
Trouble? Okay?
Yeah.
Rightio. See ya, are you off again? Yeah, bye.
Bye, Shane. Shane's always off somewhere. His attention span is short, his ability to comprehend is severely limited. And for 5 decades, Diane has tended to him with what can only be described as love. It certainly wasn't for the money. For decades, recorded by family photos, Diane was not paid to care for Shane. But in 2010, on paper anyway, something changed. The Human Rights Review Tribunal ruled excluding parents from payment for caring for their disabled children was inconsistent with the Bill of Rights. And the government eventually responded with funded family care, FFC, funded being a relative term. Diane's funding for Shane, and this is in paid hours per week.
It went from 11 to, there's been about 3 changes, 11 to 17 to 19 to 21 and then back to 17.
So 17 hours is
17
what?
hours.
So 2.5 hours a day, roughly.
Yeah.
And so the other 21.5 hours a day, what would Shane be doing if you weren't looking after him?
Good point. Well, that's it. I mean, somebody has to look after him. Somebody has to look after him. It's just no
It's that simple, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that simple.
I'm Jane Carrigan.
And Jane Carrigan, how did you meet Diane?
I was working in a home for intellectually disabled people, and Diane drove the bus.
We met Jane in her office, which is in Diane's garage. Knowing Diane and her care of Shane, Jane became obsessed with why Diane was being paid so little underfunded family care. So she began to study how FFC was written, interpreted and being applied.
It is Kafkaesque because it just makes no sense. You know, it's just the bureaucracy is maddening. The money that is spent on the bureaucracy is maddening. 2 years ago, while the Ministry of Health was going on about how expensive the FFC program was going to be, they had an overspend of $18 million on their renovations in their new office. So, you know, and that's all just swept away, means nothing. Instead, mothers like Diane or fathers like Cliff Robinson, those people are sort of, you know, the inference are they're greedy and they're sitting at home wanting to make money out of their children, and nothing could be further from the truth, and nothing could be more offensive, quite frankly.
Jane became more and more offended. She obtained ministry papers in which Diane's weekly pay was calculated according to how long each task she did for Shane took.
The upshot was, as we discovered as part of Discovery, was toileting for Shane was based on twice a day, 1 minute each time, 7 days a week, once in the morning and once at night for 1 minute. And then because Shane has issues with his bowels, for lack of a better word, he is allowed one accident a week at 5 minutes.
So hold on a sec. Here, the toileting is Diane will be paid for wiping his bottom and taking him to the toilet twice a day, 1 minute each time, being a total of 14 minutes a week that the ministry thinks she should be paid for wiping his bottom and taking him to the loo.
And these are people doing the assessment. Nightmare.
It's just bollocks, basically.
Shane? I met Shane yesterday.
Yeah.
Hello. Which one's your favourite monkey? He showed me his book about animal families with a CD soundtrack.
Tadpole.
Tadpole. It's a very good name for a monkey. Yeah. So, is this your favourite book?
Yeah.
Yeah. We Are Family includes Sister Sledge singing, "We are family." Yeah. I've got all my sisters and me. Yeah. Caring for him is a full-time job. Like a toddler, he can't be left alone. On top of his disabilities, he has a form of autism, which means he feels safest at home and with Mum. The ministry effectively pays Diane to meet Shane's unmet needs, wiping his bottom, showering him, cooking and cutting up his food, but not for simply being with him. But Shane can't be left alone.
And a classic example of this is when we had Shane's last assessment, we were talking about leaving Shane on his own, and he can't be left on his own. So I said to the assessor, Taikura, if, for an example, I ran out of milk, I would have to get Shane's shoes on, lock up the house, go down, get the car out, go to the supermarket or the dairy, buy the milk, come back, reverse the thing, come in. And the reply to that was, and written down, well, Diane, just make sure you never run out of milk.
By now, Shane was outside on the deck, lost in whatever reverie preoccupies him sometimes, staring out to the horizon, hoping a plane might fly overhead. A very young child in a man's body.
Every year, we have to fill in a form. I have to fill in a form to say that Shane's still special needs or intellectually disabled.
Downstairs, over a period of months, Jane had become angrier and angrier. Other than the parents themselves, who really was acting for people like Shane?
This is an area, a demographic, a cohort of people where there just really is no representation. The Ministry of Health will go on and on and on about how they consult with the disability community and what have you. But you can't tell me that somebody who is a high-functioning person who's blind, but a company director and all of those other things, has any better knowledge of how a complex person sitting down the bottom end of the disability spectrum should be managed. And
like Shane.
Like Shane.
So Jane got into the car, drove into town and started door-knocking lawyers to find one who'd take the case pro bono. Why did you take this case, Paul Dale?
Well, basically because Jane asked me to, and because when she explained what was involved, it seemed like there was a good deal of merit to it.
And there was. The case Paul Dale took to the appeal court for Shane, Diane and Jane won.
In essence, they've said that the Crown have got, or the Ministry of Health rather, have got it wrong in their approach to their policy. I think just as importantly, though, they've said that the policy itself is hard to understand, and it is incredibly difficult. There are so many documents, some of them old, some of them new, that don't really reconcile with each other and don't provide you with a clear statement of what is involved. Having said that, it ought to be easy. I mean, a 76-year-old mother's looking after a 51-year-old man who's really severely disabled. It shouldn't be hard to work out how to pay her for looking after him, especially when you work out that it's cheaper for her to do it than anybody else, and cheaper still than going into a home.
You know, and I must stress, it's not the money. In a lot of cases with the parents, perhaps it is the money. It's not, it's just the whole damn principle of the matter. And it's not about Shane and I. It's about, you know, everybody. If it helps somebody along the way, later down the track, then, you know, good.
I mean, the idea is to keep people like Shane in the community. That's got to be the best way. And the Court of Appeal have given a strong pointer as to how they should do that, and hopefully they will.
Shane, would you like some lunch?
No.
Don't you want any lunch?
No.
Do you want a yogurt?
No.
Nothing. Well, that makes it easy for your mother, doesn't it?
Nothing much has been easy for Diane, but she's won and Shane's won, and by golly, he knows he won something. It's just he doesn't understand what. Neither the ministry nor the new minister would be part of this story. They're still assessing the meaning and consequences of the Court of Appeal's decision. But Jane knows what she thinks the minister should do.
What is disabled is the system, and what needs to be completely disabled is the system. So I have huge hopes that I've asked to meet with the minister. I haven't heard back from him, but I'm worried that the advice he will be taken will be filtered and it will be self-serving.
We stayed as Diane tidied and Shane sat in his favourite seat in the living room watching the Muppets for the 1000th time more. He loves the Muppets. Shane, at the centre of something much larger than him, who may have changed things for people like him and for the carers in their family. And Diane, his mum, who objected on principle to their treatment and won in the Court of Appeal. What's the best thing about this?
That we won. Well, the best thing about that is hopefully there's going to be change.
Shane was tired by now, and he went to his room and shut the world out. Back in the living room, Diane was reflecting on 51 years of being his mother.
I think it's the old story, unless you've actually got a disabled person, you know, you really sort of don't sort of know what it's like. But then, you know, then again, because I've always had Shane, I know no different anyway. He's just, as I said, he's just part of the family. And, yeah, and that's so, yeah, no, he's a bit of all right.
It's Diane Moody talking about her son Shane. Now, we would really love to talk to the Ministry of Health about this. The Court of Appeal attached a postscript to its decision, which can be found online, pointing out it is the third time they've ended up hearing issues along these lines in the Court of Appeal and fundamentally suggesting they are completely over it. The Ministry of Health say they are still digesting the Court of Appeal's decision. We will ask them every day for an interview until they are available.